going to come up and speak to us a little bit about the Revolutionary War on a topic I don't think many of us have really considered that much in any great detail. I've heard her speak before, and she's quite excellent. So, Dr. Brynne.
So good to see so many faces here. Mark and I met at the Omaha SAR, so I was very happy when he invited me to come down and speak to you all today. I love speaking to people who are actually interested in the American Revolution. And I think we're interested in the American Revolution, right? Yeah, maybe a little bit? Okay, good. So I'm going to try to talk for about 20 minutes. If I go over, Mark has promised to do one of these first and then pull out a hook afterwards. So hopefully I don't bore you too much. Like Mark said, I teach history at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. When I finished my doctorate at the University of Delaware, I was a short-term fellow, Charles Young Fellow for Military History with the United States Army. And then I just moved out to Omaha about a year ago, really enjoying working in the history department, teach classes on colonial America, revolutionary America, and also American and international military history. My forthcoming book with the University of Virginia Press looks at the topic that I'm going to be sharing with you all today, which is prisoner administration during the Revolution. So what I'm going to go with today is sort of a broad-based overview of prisoner administration during the Revolution, and hopefully teach you all a couple things maybe you didn't know before about how we handled prisoners during the war, how the British handled prisoners during the war, give you guys a little bit of a teaser for that book that's coming out next year. So we'll start with just sort of a stats moment. Does anybody know sort of how many prisoners the Americans captured during the Revolution? Or does anybody have a guess, maybe? Somebody be brave and give me a guess.
3,500.
3,500, okay. Anybody from this table, any guesses? I saw your hands up. Did you put up 10? 10? Okay.
4,200.
4,200, okay. 4,200, 3,500. Any more guesses?
12,000.
Much closer, sir. So the Americans captured about 17,000 British and British Allied prisoners during the Revolutionary War. So British Allied, that refers to the Hessians or the German prisoners that are also going to be supporting King George III during his reign of terror, if you will, right? Okay, so yes.
So does that include the loyalists?
That does not include. That's a very good question. So that number does not include loyalists, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, the difference between loyalist prisoners and uniformed regular soldiers prisoners. Yeah, good question. Okay, so we've got 17,000 British and British Allied prisoners in the American interior during the Revolution from 1775 until 1783, give or take, right? How many prisoners did the British capture of us? Let's have some guesses.
30,000. 18,000.
30,000, 18,000, 14,000, close. Okay, 18 to 25,000 prisoners. All right, we used to think it was 18,000. Historian Edwin G. Burroughs did some work on those numbers, figured out at least 18,000 died in captivity, 25,000 total were taken. So the British captured a few more of us than we did of them. Let's think about where most of those prisoners were taken, okay? So there's lots of different contexts into which prisoners will fall into captivity, right? You've got the small skirmish actions. We think about things like Lexington and Concord, the capture of Fort Ticonderoga and Fort Crown Point in May of 1775. Small garrison numbers of troops, right? Less than 100 or a couple hundred at a time. But let's think about our big windfalls. We're all American Revolution experts here. When did the Americans win some major victories against the British during the Revolution? What are the battles at which the Americans are actually winning? Saratoga is a big one, okay? What else? There's one other really big one, happens in 1781. It's on Chesapeake Bay.
Yorktown.
Yorktown. Okay, so those are our two big windfalls for the Americans, right? Battles of Saratoga, two conflicts. This is Freeman's Farm and Venus Heights. In 1777, the Americans are going to capture a total of 6,000 men under General John Burgoyne, Gentleman Johnny. That's going to be our convention army, the conventioneers. They're going to be our first big prisoner group. And then we capture about 7,000 more under Lord Cornwallis in October of 1781 at the Battle of Yorktown. Other big ones that we can think of, maybe not quite as big, but we also won. Cowpens, yes, very good, okay. Further north, Trenton and Princeton, we capture a total of 1,000 prisoners. So not many victories in the Southern Theater, but yes, Cowpens, Kings Mountain, we also captured cumulatively around 1,000 prisoners in the Southern Theater. And then we have Trenton, we have Princeton, and then the biggies with Saratoga and Yorktown. Okay, where are the British capturing most of us? When are the British triumphing over George Washington and his forces. I know as Americans we don't like to think about these battles as much, but where are the Americans like really just not doing great and catching it in the teeth?
Long Island.
Long Island, yeah. Well, you're going to lose about 5,000 prisoners total in the fight for New York. So that's going to be a really big one. Long Island. Where else are the British really victorious?
Georgia.
Yes, Georgia. Southern Campaign.
Charleston.
Charleston. We lose about 5,000 prisoners under General Clinton at Charleston in 1780. Other big ones to think about include Brandywine and Germantown, right? The two big engagements where we see that Howe is heading to try to go take the American capital of Philadelphia, ultimately succeeds at doing that, and on the way, the Americans are going to catch it in the teeth at Brandywine and then also at Germantown where the British are going to be taking prisoners. Okay, so that's the groundwork. British Army is about 80,000 strong during the war. That's not always going to be military readiness, but when we're thinking about, again, regular soldiers and we're thinking about Germans who are participating, it's about 80,000 total at any given time. Washington's army, anywhere from 20 to 30,000. That's not going to be his actual military readiness strength, but that's the overall size. So we're talking about some pretty big numbers of prisoners coming through, okay? First prisoners of the American Revolution that were captured by the Americans. I already talked about each of these two engagements. Ticonderoga, right, Crown Point. And then what are those two engagements in Massachusetts, April 17, 1775? Concord and Lexington, yeah. So we're going to capture small prisoner groups, right? The Americans have no idea what to do with these prisoners. Okay, they have no idea what to do with these prisoners. There's two Continental Congresses, right? The first Continental Congress, do they resolve independence? Yes or no? No. That's why we have a second one, right? We get it. Okay, that didn't work. We give the olive branch petition to King George III, Declaration of Rights and Grievances. King George III says, tough. Sorry, you're still my colony, so we are going to get a second Continental Congress going. They meet on May 10th, 1775. Significance of May 10th, 1775 is the exact same day that Ethan Allen and Colonel Benedict Arnold capture Fort Ticonderoga. So they capture Fort Ticonderoga the same day that those delegates are taking their seats in Philadelphia to resolve for independence on July 2nd, 1776, right? So when word gets to Congress, hey, guess what? There's a nation war effort that has started without you. We've already taken guns to the British up here in upstate New York, around Canada, in Massachusetts, and by the way, we've captured prisoners. Congress says, guess what? This is about 60 items down my list of to-dos right now because I'm about to wage a multinational war against the strongest empire in the world and the most formidable navy in the world. We don't really care what you do with them, just don't abuse them, okay? That's pretty much all that Congress has to say from 1775 to 1776 to the Americans, is like, just don't let them die, give them some food, right? So you're the Americans, you're holding on to prisoners from Ticonderoga or from Lexington and Concord. What are you going to do with them? I mean, this is not a rhetorical question. Like, put yourself in the mindset of a revolutionary in 1775. There is no rule book. There is no SAR. There is no DAR. What do you do? Let's have some ideas. What do you do with prisoners of war? And your intercontinental body that is supposed to be governing this nation war effort just took their seats. What do you do with prisoners of war? Sorry?
What season?
May 1775.
Put them to work farming.
Put them to work farming? So parole them? Yeah, parole them. Did you have an answer as well, Marty?
I was going to say farmers.
Yeah, exactly. The Americans do exactly that. They put them to work. They say, we can't afford them. Does Congress have the authority to tax? Yes or no? No, it does not have the authority to tax. Not going to get that to the Constitution, right? So Congress is not going to pay for these guys. Is Britain going to pay for its prisoners? Now, caveat here, as so you studied 18th century warfare, the standards of the time in Western traditions, Western martial tradition, is that you will pay for your own prisoners in the enemy's captivity, right? However, that assumes that your enemy is a legitimate combatant, a legitimate belligerent. So the British did that for the French during the 7 Years' War, right? They're not going to do it for the Americans. What did British officials call Washington? Did they call him General Washington? What did they call him? They called him Esquire. They did not acknowledge the legitimacy of the American cause. So to adhere to international standards of warfare in treating with American prisoners is to give up the very question of American independence, right? It is to concede the question of American independence. However, right, you also can't go full 45 on it. You may not put General Washington's head on a spike. You may not do that. Even if you capture him, you can't do that. You cannot try these men as traitors. You cannot mass execute them. You can't go full 45. You can't treat them like you treated the Irish. You can't treat them like you treated the Scots. We are stuck in this weird middle zone for the entire revolution between legitimate combatant and traitor. So that is going to be that's the rub of everything that I've studied for the past 10 years of this book, is how do the Americans navigate taking care of British prisoners when the British are consistently going to treat American prisoners as less than legitimate combatants, less than prisoners of war, but a couple steps above traitor, right? So here's what we see end up happening with the treatment of American prisoners. It's exactly what you're saying, sir, and what you're saying. We're going to have George Washington and Congress constantly communicating instructions to colonial, later state leaders saying, look, it doesn't matter if the British aren't going to treat us as legitimate. Because everybody who's listening to the British right now thinks that we are a ragtag army without shoes who don't deserve support of European nations. And without that support, we will die alone. We will not win. This revolution will not be successful without France. It won't be successful without Spanish money. It won't be successful without Dutch money. So it doesn't matter how many of our men die in the hulls of the HMS Jersey. We need to maintain the standards of inter-European warfare, even if the British won't do it for us. And they are tested and tested and tested with that result for the entirety of the war. Because anybody who's heard anything about prisoners of war knows about the HMS Jersey. Who knows about the HMS Jersey and can tell us a little bit about it? Yes, ma'am.
I just know we lost a lot of people in war with us.
Sure.
That was miserable.
We've probably lost close to 18,000. Yeah, and the gentleman in the back, what's the HMS Jersey?
British prison ship right there in the Wallabat by Brooklyn.
Yes, Wallabout Harbor in New York City, in the harbor, right? So the British, again, they're not going to go full 45. They're not going to put heads on spikes. But they're going to put that number of prisoners that we talked about, that roughly 18 to 25,000 American prisoners, a lot of them are going to be hosted, or housed, I should say, in prison hulks, right? These big ships. You transport your men over on the ship, and then you gut the ship and you fill it with prisoners, and you put it in an occupied harbor. So a lot of these prison ships are in New York Harbor, and men are going to be stacked up on top of each other in there with very little attention paid to them, not very much food given to them. So this is what I mean when I say the Americans are going to be tested in their resolve to treat British prisoners legitimately during the war, because all they're getting is letters from home, or letters from the HMS Jersey of men who are dying in the hulls, right? But Congress, again, and Washington say for the entire war, you have to treat these men nicely. You have to treat them according to European standards of warfare. You have to parole them if they're officers, because that gives them that word of honor that they will not run away. So you can have a 5-mile radius around this detention center, for example, right? So you have to give them parole. You have to give them food. But then you get like 2-3 months into this war, and people are starting to submit their receipts to Congress, say, okay, this is how much the foreign cost, and here's how much it was to lodge this person here, and oh, we built this barrack structure, and here's where we put the prisoners. Look, we treated them nice, that's all you told us to do. Here's the bill. And Congress says, you see, France isn't paying us yet. We can't tax. That's on you. That's on, the states have to bear that. And so exactly what you're saying, right? They decide, instead of just having these be a stationary population that is going to become a burden on our economy, let's put them to work. So if you were walking around in the Pennsylvania backcountry during the American Revolution, you are just as likely to run into a revolutionary on his furlough as you are to run into a British or a Hessian prisoner of war who is walking to or from his place of employment, who's on a labor contract with an individual who assumes the risk of that person, also assumes the responsibility of feeding them, housing them, giving them any medical care that they need. And they've done that through contract with local commissaries who are in those detention centers. That's how the Americans handle prisoners during the Revolution. In 1777, George Washington says, well, you know, this is a little bit too disaggregated, decentralized, right? We're going to establish what's called the Department of Prisoners. So we see this attempt to sort of formalize the American military logistical system by establishing a department. He appoints a New Jersey lawyer named Elias Boudinot to be the first commissary general of prisoners for the United States. Elias Boudinot has a very sad, frustrating tale that I tell in my book, and I will come back and promote it very hard when hopefully you'll have me back after this. But that's Elias Boudinot. He initially turns down the offer. He turns down the job offer from Washington, and Washington's already had one guy turn him down. And so he sends Boudinot a letter, and he says, if every patriot in America turned down their opportunity to serve, we won't gain our independence. And Boudinot said, oh, shoot, okay. See you in a few weeks, George. And he became our first Commissary General of Prisoners. The British, they are going to establish, they're going to build off existing systems that they have for prisoner administration. They had, under Parliament, it's called the Sick and Hurt Board. This board is responsible for caring for prisoners. So that is going to be the entity that initially assumes responsibility for prisoners of war for the British during the conflict. And again, a lot of these guys are going to be put not just in prison ships, but also in converted buildings, so sugar houses. In places like New York City that used to be a hotbed of revolutionary activity, we're going to see a lot of the buildings that were used by the Sons of Liberty actually get converted as an insult to the cause into prisons for housing some of those 18 to 25,000 American prisoners of war. So the British are going to commit to a retributionary campaign against American prisoners. Now they can't hold on to this forever, right? We get to about 1777. Who most famously joins the American cause as a result of the battles of Saratoga? Which major power? I'll give you three. Yes, okay, France. So France is going to join us. This changes the stakes for the British, right? They understand that their sugar colonies in the British West Indies are now in jeopardy, and so they're going to want to treat a little bit more with Congress and say, hey, no guns me, no guns you. Let's just go ahead and switch these prisoners. Let's exchange them, because exchanges have not been happening during the war, again, because the British are unwilling to acknowledge the Americans as legitimate combatants, right? The problem here now is that Congress would like to please be repaid for all of the expenses that have been spent on British prisoners before we do a general exchange. And that is not something that Congress is willing to give up, which means that even after 1777, even after the temperature of the revolution, if you will, sort of gets turned down by the intervention of the French and the Spanish and the Dutch, we're still not going to be able to effectuate what was called a general exchange. That will be put off until the end of the war. And this is where we get a little bit of a lesser known part of this history, which is, well, if you can't be exchanged by Congress, and if you're just languishing in the HMS Jersey in Wallabout Harbor, you know, what are you supposed to, are you just going to die there? Did you get lucky? Well, there's a couple different things that could happen to you if you are that prisoner, that American prisoner in British captivity. Your state can come and get you. The states actually had their own navies during, I mean, you hear John Adams talks about this. He says the states conducted themselves like independent republics during the war. So the states used their navies to go out and to get their men out of British captivity and effectuate small-scale individual exchanges to get their citizens out of those prison ships, of those sugar houses, right? So this is one way. Also, your family can come and get you. Your family can come and try to effectuate. I mean, this is how decentralized and crazy this is that Congress isn't doing anything, and people don't want their husbands, their fathers, their sons to die in captivity because Congress is not wanting to exchange the prisoners until they get a payday from Britain, right? That's not worth it to these individuals. So they're going to go out and actually try to effectuate exchanges for their loved ones independently, right? Sea captains will do the same thing. We have a lot of that going on. Which sort of leads into the last thing that I want to share with you. I'll wrap up on this, and we can take as much time for questions as you want. I might make up an answer if I don't know, the answer. I'm sure you guys have really great questions for me. Is that this is a very intensely personal story for prisoners. And the stories that have kept me studying this subject for the better part of the last decade of my life is that it's very personal. I mean, you see letters from mothers writing to the Connecticut General Assembly in 1778 saying, I need my son back. I need him back. What can you do? Can we send our Navy to go get him? Because Congress is not going to get him, right? With those detention centers I was talking about, with the British Allied prisoners, right? These detention centers are not big jails that nobody can leave, right? These people are working for the local farmers. They're working for local artisans. They're out and about. They're on parole. They're interfacing with early Americans. And what you see in that space is common ground being found and interpersonal relationships and economic relationships being built upon the common ground that is granted by that proximity between the host inhabitants, and the captives. No longer are you a redcoat or a British enemy or a British soldier and I'm an American or I'm a revolutionary, I'm a patriot. Now we're just people. So you have congregations in upstate New York, you have congregations in Pennsylvania where German prisoners are worshiping alongside German Americans. That's how we get a lot of our German American population actually, is a lot of German officers will intermarry with local women and choose to stay in America after the revolution has ended. We see that a lot of economic interactions are happening between prisoners and host communities. Probably my favorite piece of evidence I've ever found researching this for as long as I have. There's a book in the archives of the Society of the Cincinnati, another wonderful genealogical society that has close ties with the SAR. This is in Washington, D.C. When you open it up, it's an original copy of, or a first edition copy of Milton's Paradise Lost, and there's two signatures on it. One says Daniel David's Artillery, and one says Lieutenant John Stone. John Stone was an American militiaman who was assigned to be a guard at a prisoner barracks structure in Rutland, Massachusetts. Daniel Davids was an artillery officer in the British Army who was imprisoned there after he was captured at the battles of Saratoga. So we know nothing more about the relationship that existed between these men except for that one of them had that book, wrote his name in it, and probably either gave it to his prison guard or vice versa, gave it to his prisoner. We see there that the line between enemy and friend becomes very blurry when you actually just think about the human dimension of these stories. And that's, you really get the human dimension within the history of prisoner management during the Revolution. So I'll go ahead and end there, but I'd love to take any questions that you have. Thanks for listening to me. I hope it was interesting. And again, I can clarify anything that I mentioned. So, yeah.
Are there instances reported of chaplains supporting both sides? A chaplain from the Brits supporting the revolution?
Supporting in what way?
Spiritual, conducting services, giving communion and whatnot.
Yes, well, there's a rule that Washington and Howe attempt to establish. The question was about chaplains during the Revolution and whether chaplains sort of moved between spaces. Washington and Howe wrote back and forth a lot in the early years of the war, trying to get an exception for chaplains and surgeons. So if you were captured and you were a surgeon, or if you were captured and you were a chaplain, you were to be immediately released, even if you didn't have a chaplain of equal rank to exchange or a surgeon of equal rank to exchange. So I've not seen any evidence of chaplains actually being forced to go into a situation of captivity. I've seen them choose to go into captivity, which is a choice that is not just afforded to chaplains, but is also afforded to wives and children of garrison troops. So when we think about the Ticonderoga prisoners, for example, there's about 100 prisoners captured at Ticonderoga. We don't know how many of their wives and children also went with them. Based on my research, it looks like we had about 12 total women and children. So chaplains in that case were offered the same choice that women and children, like camp followers, were offered, which is you can go into captivity if you would like to continue your work there. And so some chaplains are offering to continue giving services to the captive men. They're not going to be held to the same sort of strict standards, of course, so they can offer services that would be welcoming to other people. I just haven't seen it specifically. But they are going to have a little bit of a less stringent rule on their mobility.
I'm just thinking of the Church of England coming face to face with Lutheranism.
Yeah.
And what that might look like.
Sure. Well, a lot of those German Lutherans, like I said, they are going to be worshiping in in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster County. And you see the chaplains there being terrified at first, right? That they're going to have, like, oh gosh, the Hessians are coming. And people were more afraid of the Germans than they were of the British. There's accounts, and I have seen this in the archives, people thought that these German soldiers were going to eat them. Like, they're like, they eat humans, right? Because they've got, like, Frederick the Great in their head, and this great, the big military hats and the miters, and, like, they were really, and they'd not met them before or interfaced with them, right? So, like, all of a sudden, this German horde, as they're referred to that way a lot, is coming. And so they're very fearful, but they still will open their doors and say, we've got the same faith, come and worship. And it's in those spaces that a lot of those gentlemen are going to meet the women that they choose to marry and then stay in the American interior. So, any other questions?
Well, kind of a follow on to what you just said. How many prisoners took an oath to the United States and joined the American forces in the States?
Great question. Negligible number. Very, very few actually join the American forces. So Washington is the brain behind putting the prisoners in Lancaster, because his idea was these are not soldiers, they are mercenaries. They are soldiers for hire. So if we put them in a place where they have their kinfolk, German Americans who have come over, they will switch sides, this will subvert their loyalties, and they will come over to our side. And Washington is guided in this idea by Christopher Ludwig, who is a German baker, he's the baker general for the Continental Army. He says if we get these guys in a place where they can speak their language, they can worship their way they're used to, they will actually, they'll start to intermarry. I wouldn't say that it fails spectacularly, because a lot of the men do end up staying. There's hardly any that actually switch sides and join the American side. Most of them are just going to say, okay, we're going to not fight anymore, we're not going to go back, but we're going to intermarry with local women. And most of those are also going to be the officers, because they have the money to actually be able to relocate, build a new life in a new place, not the enlisted. So it's, it doesn't backfire on Washington, but it also doesn't really work out the way he thinks it will, which is sort of what I talk about in the book, about how Washington and Elias would know, and a lot of these big guys who are put in charge of the administration of prisoners during the war, they really tend to overlook that human element that comes into play in the lower ranks, right? People are not seeing each other as enemy or friend or whatever. They're very much transcending that boundary in the captivity centers, in the detention centers, and just seeing each other as human beings. And that's what happens to a lot of these German prisoners, is they end up marrying local women. One, really famously, this is kind of a scandalous story, so you'll forgive me, but there's a woman named Bathsheba Spooner. Could never forget a name like Bathsheba Spooner. She's in Massachusetts, and she takes a lover among the German prisoners who are in Rutland, Massachusetts, which is one of the prisoner detention centers near her home. And she gets pregnant, and the German soldier says, well, it's fine, I'll kill your husband, it's going to be great. So he goes and he gets an accomplice, and these two German prisoners kill her husband, and they get arrested for it, and she gets arrested for it. I believe they both, I think both of them hanged, all three of them hanged, but Bathsheba Spooner said, well, I'm pregnant, you can't hang me. And so she was examined by a group of women, as happened in colonial America. It's like, okay, well, we'll find out if you're actually pregnant. And they said, no, she's not pregnant. All three of them hanged. She had been pregnant. So there's stories like that that you see throughout the archives of people intermarrying or otherwise interfacing with prisoners. We'll leave it at that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do the British have prisoner ships any place besides New York?
They had a couple in Charleston, yeah.
All right. Do the British keep records of American prisoners on those ships?
Yes, which is why we had the misestimate for such a long time. And we thought it was only 18,000, because a lot of the records that we had were death records. And so when you only count those, you get a lower number than what Burroughs estimates, which is closer to 25,000. We also didn't know for a long time the British don't just keep the prisoners here. A lot of the war after 1781, even before that, happens at sea, right? I mean, John Paul Jones, yeah, right? If it's easier to bring you back to England, they will bring you back to England. And so there are prisons in England that are hosting American prisoners as well. I've been chasing down a crazy story for a couple of years now of a guy named John Blatchford who wrote a diary of his experiences in captivity as an American. He was a midshipman who was taken off the coast of Massachusetts in 1775. He claims he was brought to Sumatra, forced to work on a spice farm. So, we get a higher number year after year that people keep studying this, because we realize that the British Empire was big, and you could just kind of put prisoners where you could put them, right? The first passports, famously the first passports that were ever like drawn up for Americans were drawn up by Franklin for American prisoners to send them home. So there's a lot of people, a lot of moving parts with it. The other piece I'll mention about the British prison ships, which were a thing before the American Revolution, were a thing after the American Revolution. We see that they're used during the Napoleonic Wars, for example. The Americans also had prison ships. We had prison ships in Boston Harbor, which remains under American control for the entire war. And the demographic of people that will be put into those ships are the loyalist prisoners that the gentleman in the front asked about. So we're talking about sort of treating British prisoners with kid gloves and trying to not treat them overly harshly in order to maintain compliance with inter-European standards of warfare for the 18th century. That is not a rule that applies to the loyalists. Because of course the Americans adopted the English legal tradition. They consider the loyalists to be traitors against the cause, and the punishment for treason is death. Yeah, so there will be loyalists who are hanged for their crimes. There are loyalists who languish in those prison ships for their crimes. There's a very famous prison in Simsbury, Connecticut called the Old Mine Prison, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a coal mine, and they put the prisoners down into it, or a mine. It's not as pretty a story when you look at the way the loyalists are treated. So, yeah. Yes.
2 points, 2 questions. The only known SAR recognized patriots buried in Kansas, the Sarah Little Davis, a prisoner of war captured primarily by Native Americans with some British assistance, moved up into Canada before she and her family were liberated, made her way back down to the Shawnee Mission, where she at one time was helping to educate the families of the people who had taken her the years before. Very interesting.
That's very cool.
Recently, and maybe in that file I'm turning in, I did an application for a person who was a Hessian soldier. It's very interesting, and maybe you can help me some more.
Sure, yeah.
So in Massachusetts, probably as a result of Ticonderoga, not Trenton as is written in many places, a prisoner goes out from Massachusetts close to a man who has a farm and a daughter. Marries the daughter probably only a year later. The line goes right through that Hessian soldier. I cannot prove that he was a patriot before the war ended. His father-in-law surely was, and so the applicant is able to join. But I'd love to be able to show that that person living today is actually a descendant of that one-time Hessian soldier.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Navy. Any idea as to how many prisoners were taken by each side from the Navy?
From the Navy specifically, no. I don't know what the breakdown is. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good question.
All right, last question might be easy. How do we get the book?
Sorry?
How do we get the book?
Well, the first draft is due at the end of August. So once I get the reader reports, hopefully it'll be out in 2027.
Okay.
I'll come back again and sell it. Right, yeah.
I just have a brief comment to make, and that is simply that within SAR and DAR, there is continual growth in scholarship in terms of recognizing the patriots. And we learn about new ones every day, people who hadn't been considered such in the past. But the number is truly growing. Of those who are known, I would estimate that only about a third of them actually have an SAR or DAR member who has applied for membership on the line of descent. We certainly are hoping to get more and more recognized. Ben Dixon, here he's sitting right here, he's past president of the chapter. When he joined SAR, he joined under a patriot, if I recall right, who had never been recognized before. He was a competence or something.
He had been recognized in the SAR, but he was also eligible for the Society of the Saints of Heaven, and they don't recognize.
Okay.
So he was an officer.
Yes.
Once fully matriculated, is there any information reference free men, landowners who became Americans and then became slave owners?
Sorry, ask it one more time.
Okay. Those who matriculated from the British forces into America,
Right,
taking a family,
Sure.
they're men of means,
sure,
they buy property,
right.
who they then have slaves. Fight another war.
You know, I think I don't know for sure, but I'll tell you where my brain's going with this, is that the majority of detention centers are in the north. Why? Because we lose so much in the south. Like, South Carolina's government's on the run from 1780. Georgia's almost joined the British. North Carolina's holding on by a string, and, you know, Washington, or Virginia is being administered by Thomas Jefferson, and he ran away. So, we're not going to see a lot of detention centers in the South. Most of the detention centers are in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey. There's one in Maryland. So if they did stay, and again, many of them did, generally they're staying in the community. That kept them for the reasons that I just laid out, with the interpersonal stuff, the economic stuff. And we've got German gunsmiths making guns in 1775. And this is one thing that Congress actually finds out about it, and they're like, oh, guys, stop letting them make our gun locks. That's insane. They're probably gonna, like, you know, make them broken or something. What are you doing? Like, they actually put a stop to that. But they're gonna stay in the north for the most part. There's no detention centers in the south. So I don't think they would get sort of acculturated into the slaveholding plantation system. I'm sure it could have happened had they relocated, but most of them are gonna stay where they land. Good question. Yeah.
Part of a later Congress, like part of later government?
Yes, yeah, a lot of them did, like, I ended up becoming not lawyers, but a lot of the people in Congress are lawyers. So I was just reading about one the other day, actually, that ended up joining local government, state government, and eventually national Congress. A lot of them are Federalists. All the military guys are Federalists. I love it. Love the Federalist Party. Let's bring them back. Anyway, thanks for having me.
Brynne, thank you very much. Very entertaining, very enlightening. We give you this certificate of appreciation from our chapter. Thank you for coming all the way down from Nebraska.
Oh, well, Mike drove. Thank you, Mike.
I only have one point. So I'll give you
Thank you so much.